GPS data tracking the movements of the boat and dispatch audio showing problems with that boat. This is the one that 18-year-old Nolan Wells and his friends were on.
On July 4th, 2026, an 18-year-old college football player got on a boat with his friends to celebrate Independence Day on a barrier island off the coast of Mississippi. 2 days later, his body was pulled from the water. Between those two facts sits a collection of details that do not fit together cleanly. A direct contradiction between two sets of people who were both there. A phone that went silent during the one window that matters most. A Snapchat account wiped clean before anyone thought to look at it. And a set of questions that Nolan Wells's parents have been trying to get answered every single day since the night he didn't come home. This week, new GPS data obtained by CBS News from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources began filling in part of the picture, tracking the movements of the boat Nolan was on, hour by hour, on the day he disappeared. A digital record that does not respond to pressure, does not adjust for loyalty, and does not care whose version of events it contradicts. It simply shows where the boat went and when. That data is part of what a grand jury will now examine, because this case is no longer just a search for answers inside a grieving family. It has crossed into the institutional machinery of the justice system, and that crossing happened for a reason. If you are following this story, and you are not subscribed yet, hit that button now, because we are going to go through everything. The contradiction that sits at the center of this case. The small details Nolan's parents cannot reconcile. The digital evidence that may tell investigators what no witness has been willing to say clearly. And the one question underneath all of it, that a family in Mississippi is waiting for someone to finally answer honestly. Let's start at the beginning. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He had grown up in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a coastal town just east of Biloxi. The kind of place where people know each other across generations, and a young man's reputation travels ahead of him. Nolan had built a good one. He graduated from Ocean Springs High School in 2025, where he played football and carried himself, by every account of every person who knew him, with the kind of quiet character that coaches spend entire careers hoping to find. Ocean Springs head football coach Jake Bramlett described him after his death as someone who was so much more than an outstanding football player, adding that he led by example, treated others with respect, and worked hard in ways that were visible to everyone around him. On National Signing Day in February 2025, Nolan spoke publicly about continuing his football career at Southwest Mississippi Community College. "It's truly a blessing being here with some of my best friends and teammates," he said. "Most of us are all going to college together. It's just truly a blessing." On July 3rd, the evening before he disappeared, Nolan cooked his parents' dinner. Baked salmon. The kind of ordinary evening that families store away without knowing they are storing it. That only takes on weight in the days that follow when it becomes the last normal thing. The next morning, July 4th, Nolan got on a boat with friends and headed to Horn Island. Horn Island sits roughly 10 miles south of the Mississippi Gulf Coast, accessible only by private boat. It is managed by the National Park Service as part of Gulf Island's National Seashore. There are no permanent facilities on the island, no staff, no communications infrastructure. On the 4th of July, it draws crowds of people celebrating on the water, boats anchored offshore, groups spread across the beach, the kind of holiday gathering that fills up quickly and empties out by late afternoon. Nolan was last seen on the beach at approximately 3 p.m., according to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office and attorney Ben Crump, who was retained by the Wells family in the days following his death. His friends left the island sometime around 4:30 p.m., citing an issue with the boat's bilge pump that was taking on water. They went back to the mainland without him. Nolan did not go with them. What nobody has been able to fully explain, not the friends, not investigators, not anyone with the authority to say for certain, is why. Around 11 p.m. that night, one of Nolan's friends reached out to the United States Coast Guard. The Coast Guard assessed the situation and determined the incident did not require their immediate assistance. Christine Wansley, Nolan's mother, contacted the Jackson County Sheriff's Department around midnight to report her son missing. A search involving the Department of Marine Resources, Gulf Island's National Seashore, and the volunteer organization United Cajun Navy began the following morning. On July 6th, a park ranger found Nolan's body in the water just off the northwestern tip of Horn Island. Dental records confirmed the identification. The Jackson County Coroner's Office confirmed it to multiple news outlets. An autopsy was conducted, but cause and manner of death have not yet been publicly released. Jackson County investigators initially indicated they suspected drowning. The family does not accept that conclusion, at least not without answers to questions that remain unresolved. He was one black with 3 young white men, Reverend Al Sharpton said publicly alongside the family, who happened to end up with his phone, with his keys. Ben Crump was direct. Nolan Wells was a beloved son, teammate, and friend who went out to celebrate the 4th of July and never came home. His family deserves answers. They deserve the truth. For nearly 2 weeks after Nolan's death, one name sat at the center of public attention without a full story attached to it. His friends, when describing why he had not returned on the boat, referred to a young woman Nolan had been speaking with on the beach. They identified her only by her first name, Katie. That name circulated in news coverage, in family statements, in social media discussions, without a complete account attached to it. Speculation filled the gap, as it always does when verified information is slow to surface. Online communities developed theories, shared photographs, and circulated claims that had no factual basis, including, critically, a claim that Katie herself might also be missing. That particular fear entered the conversation on the very first night. According to someone present on a phone call with Christine Wansley, as she tried to locate her son, Katie's name was mentioned almost by accident, as someone Nolan had wanted to stay behind with, and then came the additional information that no one on that call could confirm or deny, that Katie might be unaccounted for as well. For a mother already in the grip of a nightmare, that moment, no name, no number, no way to find the second person, stacked one fear directly on top of another that had nowhere left to go. That fear turned out to be unfounded. Katie had never been missing. She had left Horn Island safely that afternoon on a different boat and had been reachable the entire time. Confirmation of that did not come from law enforcement. It came from her mother, who posted publicly to correct the record once her daughter's name began spreading online in ways she had not anticipated. According to that account, Katie was on Horn Island that day, spent time with Nolan, and the two parted ways sometime in the afternoon. Her mother stated that her daughter had no knowledge of anything that happened to him after they said goodbye. She got on a different boat. She went home. If that were the complete picture, this part of the story would end quietly. It does not. Because attorney Ben Crump, representing the Wells family, has stated publicly and specifically that what Katie says about her final conversation with Nolan does not match what his friends have said. According to Katie's account, as relayed by Crump, Nolan told her he was planning to rejoin his friends and get back on the boat before they left the island. He intended to leave. He said so. According to the friends themselves, Nolan told them the opposite, that he was going to stay behind on the island with Katie, by his own choice, in his own words. They're not saying the same thing, Crump said publicly. One of them is telling the truth, one is not. We have to get to the bottom of that. Both accounts cannot be accurate. That is not an analytical judgment, or an interpretive leap. It is a simple factual reality. Two people who were both present at the same conversation have produced two directly contradictory versions of what Nolan said. And sitting behind that single word, contradictory, is a family that has to live with both versions simultaneously, unable to confirm which one is real, unable to ask their son. If Katie's version is accurate, then something happened in the space between Nolan stating his intention to leave and the boat actually pulling away from the island without him. Something interrupted a plan he had already expressed out loud. Nobody has explained what that something was. If the friend's version is accurate, then Nolan made a deliberate and conscious decision to remain alone on a remote barrier island with no facilities, no communications, no boat, and no phone, as his only confirmed way home departed without him. Which raises an entirely different set of questions about what happened to him in the hours that followed, alone on an island that had emptied out by late afternoon. Neither version resolves cleanly into the image his parents carry of their son. His father, Elmore Wansley, said on Good Morning America, "We always tell him, if you go with a group, you stay with a group. If you go with 5, you come back with 5. He always said, yes, sir. He knew to stay with his group. So why would he split from his group?" That question has not been answered. Beyond the central contradiction, Nolan's family has raised a set of smaller details publicly that do not make headlines individually, but accumulate into something that cannot be easily set aside. The first involves something as simple as a piece of clothing. The official police report, according to Christine Wansley, lists Nolan as wearing black shorts at the time of his disappearance. But a young woman who was on the island that day later reached out to Christine and shared photographs showing Nolan wearing blue shorts, not black. On its own, a color discrepancy in a police report reads as a clerical error. The kind of minor mistake that happens in the early hours of a chaotic missing persons report and gets corrected without much consequence. But try to understand what that detail means to a mother who can no longer simply ask her son what he was wearing, or where he went, or why the account on record does not match the photographs she is now holding. For Christine Wansley, it is not a footnote, it is a thread. And in a case built almost entirely on other people's memories and statements, one thread that doesn't match makes you look for the next one. Then there is what happened when the family went to retrieve Nolan's car. According to the family's account, they went to collect his vehicle from a friend's driveway, a task that should have taken minutes. The friend came to the door, said he could not find the keys, and went back inside to look. Time passed. Eventually, the keys were located, in a place another person, overheard on a phone call during the wait, mentioned they had been the entire time. According to the family, the keys were sitting on top of an Xbox inside the house. The family has described that delay as friction appearing at the precise moment when everything needed to be straightforward. They are not alleging anything specific, they are describing what they experienced. And what they experienced, in the middle of the worst days of their lives, was a simple task that did not go simply. And then there is the phone. Nolan's phone was not with him when his body was found. It had traveled back to the mainland on the boat with his friends. His parents did not receive it from law enforcement. They tracked it down themselves, using a monitoring application, and retrieved it directly. Attorney Ben Crump described it as bizarre for a teenager to leave their phone behind under any circumstances. It's strange, he said, noting that the phone was with the friends who returned to the mainland, while Nolan remained on the island, or was left on the island, without it. When Christine Wansley got the phone and looked at it, she found something that stopped her. Nolan had 2 Snapchat accounts. He was, by every account of everyone who knew him, a constant and enthusiastic user of the platform, the kind of person who documented ordinary moments with the casual frequency of someone who had grown up treating social media as a running journal of daily life. At events with friends, he would be posting. On a holiday boat trip to a barrier island on the 4th of July, surrounded by people his age, he would be posting. Both accounts were empty. No saved videos. No photos from that day. Nothing. It wasn't even 24 hours, Christine said publicly. Snapchat content typically disappears after 24 hours. She had the phone before that window closed, and there was already nothing there to find. I know when kids get together for events like that, they're snapping, she said. They are making videos, taking pictures, and I'm just like, where is it? The silence on those 2 accounts, during the one day that matters more than any other, is the detail that Nolan's family cannot explain away, and the location tied to the Snapchat account, according to the family, did not match the location where the phone itself was eventually found. A retired FBI agent, consulted by News Nation, stated that investigators may be able to recover multiple layers of data from the account, even if content was deleted. That digital evidence of that kind does not simply disappear because the visible record appears empty. The Jackson County District Attorney, Angel Myers McElrath, met with Ben Crump and the Wells family on July 15th. Following that meeting, Crump announced that once the sheriff's office completes its investigation, the case will be turned over to a grand jury. District Attorney McElrath confirmed the process, standard procedure in Jackson County for unknown deaths. A grand jury is a panel of citizens that reviews evidence presented by prosecutors and determines whether there is sufficient probable cause to move forward with criminal charges. It is not a trial, it is a threshold. And the fact that this case is now approaching that threshold means that investigators, prosecutors, and a family waiting for answers are all operating on the same timeline. An independent autopsy, funded by Colin Kaepernick, was conducted on Nolan's body in Washington, D.C., by a doctor with no connection to Mississippi. Results from both the state autopsy and the independent examination have not yet been publicly released. The family's legal team and local investigators have agreed to jointly examine Nolan's cell phone. Ben Crump has also called for the cell phones of Nolan's friends to be examined as part of the investigation, and the GPS data, the hour-by-hour record of where that boat went on July 4th, is now in front of investigators who will have to account for every timestamp it contains. Before anything else tonight, before the GPS data, before the grand jury language, before the phone inspection and the legal terminology, it is worth remembering what is actually happening in Ocean Springs, Mississippi right now. A mother is planning a funeral. Christine Wansley announced that her son's homegoing celebration will be held on Monday, July 20th, at Center Point Church in Ocean Springs. The same community that watched Nolan grow up, that celebrated his signing day in February, that filled the stands at his games, and heard his coaches describe him as the kind of young man every program hopes to build around. That community now has to prepare to say goodbye to him. He would not want us to be sitting around crying and eating, Christine said. So what we are going to do is kind of have a party to celebrate him. That sentence, chosen by a grieving mother to describe her son's final celebration, tells you more about who Nolan Wells was than any detail in any investigative record. And it is the thing that should stay underneath everything that follows tonight, because every piece of data and every procedural development in this case exists in the context of two parents who do not get to walk away from this story once it stops trending. They live inside it now, permanently, and the only thing anyone covering it can honestly offer them is care in how their son's story gets told. With that said, here is what the record actually shows. The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources tracks vessel movements on those waters automatically, logging GPS coordinates continuously throughout any trip. That data was obtained by CBS News. And what it shows, timestamp by timestamp, is a sequence that investigators are still working to fully explain. At 9:56 in the morning, the boat left its dock. The day was beginning the way thousands of other July 4th boat trips begin along that stretch of the Gulf Coast. Friends, a barrier island, a holiday. At 11:14 a.m., the boat reached Horn Island. For several hours after that, the group was on the island together. At 4:31 in the afternoon, the boat left Horn Island. Nolan was not on it. What follows that departure is the part of the GPS record that investigators have not yet publicly explained, and that Nolan's parents replay in their minds, searching for what might have happened inside it. At 5:52 p.m., 1 hour and 21 minutes after leaving Horn Island without Nolan, the boat's track position showed it moving into Fort Bayou. At 6:06 p.m., it was back at the dock. Then at 7:19 p.m., the tracked position shifted again, to the Fort Bayou boat launch. From there, according to the Marine Resources data, the boat was removed from the water entirely, transported over land, and moved to a residence in Gautier, owned by the boat's owners. 4 separate movements, automatically recorded, beginning at the moment Nolan was left behind, and continuing across several hours into the evening of July 4th. That is not a complicated boat trip home. It is a sequence, and it is the exact sequence that sits at the center of what a grand jury will eventually be asked to examine, alongside everything else investigators have gathered about that afternoon. Sit with what it means that this data exists at all. In cases built almost entirely on competing witness accounts, a GPS record is something different. It does not adjust for loyalty. It does not soften a timeline because of grief or friendship or fear of consequences. It simply registers where something was and when. And what it registered on July 4th, 2026, after 4:31 in the afternoon, is a pattern that nobody has fully accounted for publicly. Nolan's parents are not waiting for someone to tell them what they already know happened. They are waiting for someone in a position of authority to explain what that sequence means and why their son was not on the boat when it began. For more than a week after Nolan's body was found, his family had not had a direct conversation with anyone in the district attorney's office. Information had come through press conferences, through attorney statements, through news reporting, but not through a face-to-face meeting with the people who would ultimately determine what happens next in this case. That changed on July 15th. Christine and Elmore Wansley sat down with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath for their first direct meeting since Nolan's death. Attorney Ben Crump described the conversation afterward as respectful and candid. A small but meaningful shift after more than a week of feeling, by the family's own account, like they were standing outside their own son's case. Out of that meeting came confirmation of something that had been anticipated but not yet formally stated. Once the sheriff's office completes its investigation, the case findings will be turned over to a grand jury. That phrase carries significant emotional weight whenever it appears in a case like this. And because of that weight, it is worth being precise about what it actually means, both for the sake of accuracy and for the sake of a family whose story has already been distorted enough by imprecise language. A grand jury referral is not a verdict. It is not a formal accusation against any named individual. It does not mean that investigators have concluded a crime took place, and it does not mean that charges have already been filed or are certain to follow. What it means specifically is that the case has reached a procedural point where its findings will be formally reviewed by a panel of citizens to determine whether probable cause exists to move forward with charges at all. It is a mechanism, a process, movement, but not resolution. And this family, after weeks of waiting for anything to move at all, understands better than most people the difference between those two words. Crump also used the July 15th press conference to correct something that had spread widely and needed to be addressed directly. In the days following Nolan's death, reporting circulated suggesting that the FBI had effectively taken over the investigation, a claim that shaped how many people understood who was running the case. According to an official statement from FBI Jackson, that characterization was not accurate. The Bureau has assisted Jackson County investigators with specific elements of the case, primarily centered on threats made against individuals connected to the investigation, threats that crossed state lines and therefore fell under federal jurisdiction. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has remained the lead agency throughout, from the first search on July 5th to everything that has followed. The FBI's involvement has been support, not command. That distinction matters because it changes the picture of accountability. The investigation belongs to Jackson County. The decisions about what goes to the grand jury belong to the district attorney's office there. Understanding who is responsible for what is part of understanding where the family's requests and the public's questions should actually be directed. And then there is the phone. From the beginning, Nolan's phone has occupied a specific kind of weight in this case that goes beyond its evidentiary value. It is the last place his digital life existed before everything went silent, the last object that was with him, and then wasn't, in a way that nobody has fully explained. His mother tracked it down using a monitoring application after Nolan's friends returned from the island. She and her husband retrieved it themselves. Law enforcement did not have it first, and when Christine looked at what was on it, she found both of his Snapchat accounts completely empty. No photos, no videos, nothing saved from the 4th of July, a day that, by every account of everyone who knew him, Nolan would have been documenting continuously. It wasn't even 24 hours, Christine said publicly, referencing the platform's standard content window. There was absolutely nothing, no saved videos. Attorney Ben Crump described it as one of the most puzzling elements of the entire case. A teenager who posted constantly, on a holiday, surrounded by friends, on a barrier island, with nothing to show for it on the one day that matters most. What came out of the July 15th meeting was an agreement that addressed this directly. Both sides, the family's legal team and official investigators, agreed to a joint inspection of the device. Attorney Eric Hertz, leading the independent investigation on the family's behalf, will work alongside law enforcement experts examining the phone together rather than separately, comparing findings in real time rather than releasing competing analyses after the fact. A retired FBI agent consulted publicly on the case stated that investigators may be able to recover multiple layers of data from Snapchat even when the visible record appears empty. That deleted content leaves traces that specialized extraction tools can reach. Digital evidence, he noted, does not simply disappear because the surface record has been cleared. As of this recording, that joint inspection has not yet taken place. The family is still waiting, the way they have been waiting, in one form or another, since the night Christine first tried to find out where her son was and couldn't get a straight answer. Before this episode closes, two things that spread widely about this case need to be corrected directly. Not because corrections are the most dramatic part of any story, but because in a case like this one, where a family's grief is playing out in front of millions of people, what spreads matters. It matters to investigators trying to work without distortion, and it matters most to two parents who have had to watch strangers debate theories about their son built on things that were simply not true. The first involves a photograph. After Nolan's body was found, an image began circulating online showing him at what appeared to be a pool party. For a brief and disorienting period, a significant number of people believed the photo proved he had been alive after July 4th, that he had somehow been photographed after the date his family was mourning him. Rolling Stone investigated and confirmed through image metadata and a direct account from his friend Trayston Shepard that the photograph had been taken on June 27th, a full week before Nolan ever went to Horn Island. It had been uploaded to a social media account on July 5th, which is what created the confusion about its timing. The image showed Nolan alive because it was taken when he was alive, before any of this happened. A grieving family had to watch hope spread through strangers online and then watch it dissolve, publicly, again and again, every time they had to clarify that the photograph did not mean what people wanted it to mean. That is a specific and unnecessary cruelty that traveled because nobody checked the metadata before sharing. The second involves a video. Many people following the case believed a circulating recording captured Nolan in an argument shortly before he vanished, treating it as though it were the missing piece that explained what happened in his final hours on the island. Attorney Ben Crump had initially described the footage as capturing Nolan demanding his phone back. Trayston Shepard addressed that directly and publicly. The voice on the recording, he confirmed, was his own, not Nolan's. It captured an unrelated altercation, and Nolan was not the person visible or audible in the footage, though Shepard noted Nolan had been nearby. Crump's legal team subsequently acknowledged they would be more careful going forward to frame unverified witness details explicitly as unconfirmed rather than established. Both corrections have been made publicly and clearly. What remains once they are removed is what was always underneath them: the GPS timeline, the unresolved contradiction between Katie's account and the friend's account, a phone that came back empty, and a family that has been asking the same questions since July 4th, without receiving complete answers to any of them. This is where the case stands as of this recording. The grand jury process has not yet concluded anything. The joint phone inspection agreed to has not yet taken place. The contradiction between the two accounts of Nolan's last known words has not been resolved by anyone with the authority to resolve it. The cause and manner of death have not been publicly confirmed by either the state autopsy or the independent autopsy funded by Colin Kaepernick, conducted in Washington, D.C. by a doctor with no ties to Mississippi. What has been confirmed is a GPS record showing 4 movements after 4:31 p.m. on July 4th, a meeting between the family and the district attorney, a grand jury referral that is standard procedure and carries no conclusion within it yet, a joint phone inspection that both sides have agreed to, and 2 pieces of widely shared misinformation that have now been corrected. There is also a young woman named Katie who never asked to become part of a national story, who by every account has done nothing but tell investigators what she remembers about a conversation she had on a beach. Her account directly contradicts what Nolan's friends told investigators. That contradiction has not been resolved. It may be the most important unresolved factual question in this entire case, and it belongs to investigators and eventually a grand jury to work through, not to the comment sections that have already rendered verdicts on everyone connected to this story without access to a single piece of actual evidence. Underneath all of the legal language and the tracked coordinates and the procedural steps, there is still just a family in a small Mississippi community that is planning a celebration of a young man's life because they have no other choice. Nolan Wells cooked his parents' dinner the night before he died. He told his teammates it was a blessing to go to college with his best friends. He knew the rule: if you go with 5, you come back with 5. His family is still waiting to understand why he didn't. If this episode gave you a clearer picture of what is actually confirmed in this case versus what has been circulating online, share it with someone who has been following the story. Subscribe if you are not already here. And tell us in the comments which unanswered question you think matters most right now. We will be back with the next confirmed update the moment there is one.